Yesterday's conversion of some 57 Muslim families in Agra by the Bajrang Dal and Dharm Jagran Manch has created a storm of protest in Parliament this morning. Were these people lured and enticed with promises of ration cards and Aadhaar cards? Beyond that, is conversion itself a defensible right, or does it imply disrespect for another person's religion? That's the key issue we shall discuss in part 2. But first, President Putin arrives in India tonight for his first annual summit with Prime Minister Modi. He comes at a time when India's relations with Russia seem to be changing, and many believe they are not as warm as they once were. So can this visit revive the sagging relationship? Or do the two heads of government need to find a new equilibrium that suits both of them? That's the first discussion tonight. And joining me now to talk about President Putin's visit is India's former ambassador to Russia, Ajay Malhotra, India's former High Commissioner to the United Kingdom, Shiv Mukherjee, and two of the country's foremost foreign policy analysts. With me in studio, Nandan Unnikrishnan and C. Raja Mohan. Shiv Mukherjee, let's start with the state of India-US relations as President Putin arrives in India. The Hindu says they are sagging. India's former ambassador to Russia, Kanwal Sibal, says they are seemingly suffering from some neglect. Would you agree with that?
I would agree somewhat. I wouldn't use the word sagging, because that implies something really going wrong. I think, you know, the world being a dynamic place and foreign policy reflecting that, I think there has been a certain perception that as our relations with the US and the recent spate of visits of our Prime Minister, the perception that our relations with the West in general are warming up to a point when we seem to be neglecting our tried and tested and strategically important relationship with an important country like Russia. There is that perception. I would say that in recent years there have been perhaps distractions which have, on both sides, on the Russian side as well as on the Indian side, that tend to support that perception.
Okay.
But I do believe that the relationship is extremely important, and this visit needs to visibly demonstrate that.
Nandan Unnikrishnan, let me once again quote Kanwal Sibal. He says other relationships have declined in relative importance.
Well, I don't agree with the term sagging, declined and all, because it depends on what you're comparing with. If you're comparing with the Soviet Union, yes, definitely. But Russia is not the Soviet Union. Russia is not even half of the Soviet Union. So therefore, if you compare to when the Soviet Union collapsed and Russia came into being in 1991, and you compare that to today, the relationship has actually grown. It has grown by leaps and bounds, and we are in a completely different level. So that is point one. Point two is that it has become a very working relationship. Our leaders meet every year. You know, it's become something of a routine. So the sexiness that is attached to, you know, you're meeting somebody once in 5 years is lost. You know, the romance is over in that sense. And the new relationships that we have are, you know, there is an element of romance attached to it. I keep comparing, you know, it's like Russia is the wife, and the United States, Japan are all these young mistresses who we are learning to flirt with.
And the mistress is always more attractive to a tired husband.
Absolutely.
Ajay Malhotra, for the press at least, one potential shadow that hangs over the India-Russia relationship at the moment are the implications of President Obama coming as the chief guest on Republic Day. Does this, to you, suggest new foreign policy priorities, in the sense a new warming of ties with Washington that could be happening at the cost of the relationship with Moscow?
Well, let me put it like this. You know, as Nandan mentioned earlier, we do have a tradition of annual summits with Russia. And as a result, since President Putin or in between President Medvedev have been coming here every second year, and our Prime Minister has been going there in between, somehow this may not be sounding as attractive or sexy a sort of relationship as you would when you come once in a while. But our relationship with Russia is a very traditional, a very well-established, deep-rooted one. And I don't think the fact that we are, you know, reaching out, or our growing engagement or our growing relationship with USA, or in fact any other country, we are trying to increase our ties with several of the major players, and that is the right way to go. I don't think that in any way impacts on our relationship with Russia, which is very deep-rooted and will continue. I think in every direction where we have close ties with Russia, beyond the political, including the political, defense, space, atomic energy, you will find many initiatives that will continue to be there and will continue. These are part of a continuum. Every year when we meet, we assess how things have moved and see how we need to move them ahead further in these very important fields for India.
Now,
so that's how I look at it.
Professor Rajamon, another element that the press believes casts a shadow over the relationship is Russia's new improved relationship with Pakistan. They've signed a new defense agreement. In November, their defense minister was in Islamabad. This week, they are part of the Karachi Defense Expo. Is this a move to get back at us, as a defense official has told the Times of India this morning? Or do you accept what President Putin said to the Hindu in his interview, that the relationship with Pakistan really is centered around counter-terrorism and drug control, and it doesn't affect India?
No, I think, because we're so used to an exclusive relationship with Russia, we see, look, they're having any engagement with Pakistan is taken amiss in Delhi. But I don't see why that should be a problem for us. Look, Pakistan has an all-weather partnership with China. We're doing quite happily with China. US has been a long-standing partner for Pakistan. We have no problem dealing with the US. So why should we expect Russia to have no relationship with Pakistan? So I think that's a very unreasonable proposition. I think we should expect Russia to have relationships with everyone. Our problem is in the bilateral level, and the problem is at the economic level. Today, at the end of the Cold War, we had no economic relationship with Americans or the Chinese. Today, the American trade is close to $100 billion if you include commodities and services.
And Russia is languishing.
China is 70 billion. With Russia is barely 10 billion, and I think it's come down. So I think instead of complaining about what they're doing with Pakistan, we got to say, look, how do we expand the relationship where there are shortfalls, and how do we consolidate where actually, as Ajay Malhotra was saying, on strategic side, we have a very good relationship. But I think there's too much weight to a strategic side and too little on the economic side. It is that imbalance, I think,
that
we need to find a way to correct.
Let's come, Shiv Mukherjee, to some of the critical elements of the bilateral relationship. Now, Russia was traditionally India's primary source of weapons. It no longer is. That role has now gone to America. Furthermore, many defense analysts believe that over the next few years, the defense relationship with America and other countries like France and Israel will grow a lot faster than the defense relationship with Russia. How much of a source of concern would this be for President Putin? And to what extent will he bring it up when he meets Mr. Modi tomorrow?
Well, certainly, I can imagine that President Putin and the Russian establishment would not be very happy about the fact that India is now sourcing its arms. We are among, in some years, the largest arms importer in the world, and that's a huge amount in terms of money and trade, apart from the strategic element in it. I can imagine him raising this, but I would call this, I would say that this shows that there is work to do on both sides. There is work to do on our side to tell the Russians, and it's a relationship, as I continue to emphasize, that is of great importance to us. This is a country that has been a tried and tested friend. One can only recall the 1971 Treaty of Friendship, which stopped that bizarre intervention in the Bay of Bengal by the Kissinger-Richard Nixon duo, and so on. It is the only country we can rely on in the P5 in the Security Council without any reservations. So it's up to us to persuade Russia, that we do need to diversify our sources of arms for good reason, and that you should not be worried about it. And we need to, exactly as Raja Mohan said, we can go ahead in lots and lots of other sectors in areas which are our strengths on our side and strengths on the Russian side, like for instance energy and diamonds. It is up to us also. I agree with Raja that we shouldn't worry too much about the Russian advance towards Pakistan and the defense security.
Let's take one issue at a time rather than take all the issues together, because it will then lose all structure. Russia has, Nandan Unikrishnan, great hopes of selling nuclear plants to India. In his interview to the Hindu, President Putin talks of at least 25 possible units. Also, the two countries are poised to sign what's going to be called a strategic vision on atomic energy. Does this suggest that Russia is less concerned about India's liability laws than, say, America and France, or just that they're less public about it?
A little bit of both, but I think they are concerned about the liability law. It's just that for the time being, with the Russians, we have found a way to finesse it. And we found entities that will ensure the Russian involvement in our nuclear program. And while the Russians may want 24 or 25 new blocks to be put up, I think that is where the problem will arise, because I can't see anyone trying to ensure their liability except an international consortium. And that will be difficult to build in the current circumstances. So however much the Russians may like the idea of increasing their involvement in the Indian civil nuclear sector, I think there is an inherent strategic ceiling to what they can do.
Is that something that the Russians will find difficult to accept and hard to swallow?
Well, you know, the Russians already have stolen the march on the others. The United States did all the heavy lifting for us, taking the sanctions off. But the Russians are the first off the block. They've already got 2 blocks going and probably will get another 2. So I don't think they will be too unhappy about that. Let's
come, Mr. Malhotra, to this question of trade. The trade relationship between two countries is often the bedrock of the relationship. But Russia-India trade is just about 10 billion. Maybe it slipped a bit in 2013. And that means that the target for 2015 of 15 billion is clearly going to be missed. Is this very limited economic exchange a substantial weakness in the relationship? And secondly, do you believe that the hope of a direct deal whereby Russia sells rough diamonds to India can substantially change things? Or is that going to be just minimum in its impact?
Yeah, first of all, let me point out that neither India nor Russia have traditionally been great trading nations. If you see our trading figures with other countries, much of it is trade in the other direction. You look at our trade with China, really it's Chinese exports that dominate. You look at our trade with USA, and you'll find gems and jewelry are the #1 trade item. And it's those very same diamonds that you're talking about, which are exported to the USA and are #1 export there. And if you cut out the IT related, it's not 100 billion you have with USA, you have really 60 billion, of which gems and jewelry is #1. So you cut out the diamonds, it's a very modest sort of situation. That being as it is, with Russia, unfortunately, we have things in common, and where it is different, it is not so easy to nail it down in the sense of finding a buyer-seller relationship. One reason for that is lack of information about each other's capabilities and strengths. When it was the Soviet Union, we didn't know where various parts of machinery and equipment we were buying were coming from. That has changed to some extent. But by and large, even from the Russian viewpoint, there's a greater interest in trading with Europe. Now with the sanctions coming in from the EU and the West and USA, there is an opening up there. But you referred to the diamonds arrangement. I think it's important to understand that 14 out of 15 diamonds in the world, when they're cut and polished, that is done in India. It's in Surat and in other parts, neighboring parts in Gujarat. So in any case, 95% of the diamonds ultimately end up in India. So it's showing up, if it's coming via Brussels, coming via Tel Aviv, it's showing up in our trade figures in any case. All that will happen is this will get transferred as coming from Russia directly into India. So in terms of impact and benefits, I don't think there's much out there.
Okay.
Because it's the same stuff that you're getting, which you were getting in any case. But the advantage lies, and I hope that they can put this through, because you would, if we notify a special zone where you would give particular advantages to foreign and Indian companies, then we could try and move off some of the action from Brussels and elsewhere into India. And I think from a Russian viewpoint, that is also attractive. After all, it is EU and Brussels which is pin-picking them with sanctions. And if they need, suppose they put a ban on import of diamonds from Russia, you have at least a more direct arrangement, which is in position. And you can also look beyond. I mean, here is one where you're talking of diamonds and their sparkles. You can look beyond to gold, for example.
Sure.
And I hope that in the next year or so, we figure out some way of getting that. We have a huge suction demand for gold, and Russia is a major producer. So maybe there's something more attractive out there.
Professor Rajamohan, let's broaden the discussion a little. Russia today is also significantly poised not just to boost its relationship with China, but also to increase its dependence on China. They've signed a $400 billion contract to supply gas over the next 30 years. They're a major arms supplier to China. And Russian banks have got a very substantial $4 to $5 billion line of credit from Chinese banks to import from China. Does this burgeoning relationship with China cause some concern to our relationship with Russia?
I think what you touched on is one of the major structural changes that's going to affect India-Russia relationship. Don't forget that the India-Russia relationship warmed. US was one factor, but China was even a bigger factor. That it was a Sino-Soviet conflict in the early 60s that actually brought India and Russia together. Now, since the 1990s, I mean, we've tried, all three of us getting together. But today the fact is, India's relationship with China and Russia's relationship with China both have expanded, and India-Russia relationship has become somewhat of a weaker link. Now, there was an exclusiveness in the strategic side where Russia used to supply us high-quality weapons, but today I think they seemed quite willing to do more things to the Chinese. More broadly, I think Russia finds China a partner in its general confrontation with the West, that to construct a non-Western order, and India, as it warms up to the West, Russia is going to find more problems. So I think this is something we're going to live with.
Let me build on that, Shri Mukherjee. In the 60s, 70s and 80s, Russia was India's great support both vis-a-vis China and Pakistan. Today, Russia is opening up its own contacts to Islamabad, and vis-a-vis China, Russia is losing weight just as China is gaining muscle and strength. Do you believe that that will therefore have an automatic impact on the nature of India's relationship with Russia?
Well, it certainly will have an impact. It's a huge development. It shows, as I said before, it shows that we have to not only factor this in to our foreign policy, but we have work to do in trying to maintain a kind of balance in our foreign policy that does not ignore the signals that are coming from a country like Russia, which has been a traditional friend and is a major player in the world, regardless of the end of the Cold War, and China, which in recent years has shown the aggressiveness that disturbs its neighbors, including India. The overture to Pakistan is something we also have to address, because as you quoted Kanwal Sibal, and Kanwal points out in his article that we have to state to Russia that our sourcing arms from other countries does not in any way undermine Russian security, whereas the Russia-China relationship indirectly and the Russian Defense Cooperation Agreement with Pakistan directly could possibly, certainly it will cause, is a matter of concern to us. And this is something that we certainly don't have a veto over it, but we can at least use diplomacy to make that point.
That is clearly one of the problem areas in the relationship as you look down the road. But there are also things that Putin wants from India. It's not a one-way street. He's coming here at a time when he's facing sanctions from Europe and America. He's coming at a time when gas and oil prices are sharply falling. Presumably, he wants some assurance from India. And an unnamed MEA spokesperson has told Outlook, and I'm quoting, "We are not going to let him down." But how far can we support Russia on Ukraine without creating problems for ourselves over Kashmir and Pakistan?
Before I take that, I just want to weigh in a little bit on this China issue. It's not a given that China and Russia will get into bed with each other. Because it's not just
Russia.
Russia.
They've got their slippers off and their feet are under the sheets.
But it is not only Russia that plays in that game. It's also China. And if you look at what you said, that the Chinese are giving money, extending funds to Russian banks, actually not entirely correct. All the banks that have been sanctioned are not getting money from the Chinese. And those are the major banks. So there is a problem in the Russia-China relationship, and the Russians are deeply unhappy about it. But nevertheless, at least on the public scene, the Chinese are not coming out and saying anything. Similarly with India,
What about Ukraine? Because we lose track of that.
That's what I'm saying. Similarly with India, on Ukraine, for example, we've already said what the Russians wanted us to say. It was said by the previous National Security Advisor when he said Russia has legitimate interests in Ukraine. And
yes, but the present National Security Advisor and the present Prime Minister may not take the same line.
No, they have virtually endorsed it.
Well, they haven't said very much in public.
They have. When they were asked about Ukraine, they said that our position is the same. So we have not changed our position. So in that sense, the Russians, what they've got in the bank from us is what they wanted and they're getting. We are not going to go further because we have problems with Ukraine. Yes, we cannot accept the referendums. We cannot accept the fact that the borders of another country were changed arbitrarily. Yes, we can't. But similar to what happened in Afghanistan or Kampuchea, we are not going to go public with our criticism.
But even if we don't go public with our criticism, Mr. Modi may be less hesitant to let it be known that on the Ukraine issue, his sympathies and his support are much more with the Western position because that suits our interests in Kashmir than with the Russian. To what extent will that rankle with Mr. Putin?
No, I think silence is going to be the strategy. You don't criticize your friends in public, so I think we're going to stick with that position. So the problem is not what we say in Ukraine. I think Modi understands, look, Russia is an important relationship. Let's keep it going as much as we can rather than trying to get caught in the argument between Western and Russia. So you can't save Russia from the West. But that doesn't mean we have to take a position. We'd rather focus on our own bilateral thing, keep it going as long as we can.
So you don't think the Ukraine issue is going to be a problem between the two?
Not at all. I mean, I think some of the Western media might make a big deal out of it. For us, I don't think that's a central issue.
And the Russians will accept India's silence as a very acceptable response from us?
Oh yeah, he thanked us profusely for our silence.
Thanked us.
Never before have people admired silence so much as the Russians have. Ajay Malhotra, there's no doubt that India wants this visit to be a success. We clearly have a lot of strategic need of support from Russia, even if we don't have a deepening economic relationship, and even if Mr. Modi might be rebalancing between Moscow and Washington. And clearly the trappings will suggest it's been successful. But do you think that underneath the surface, this is a relationship that's undergoing fairly significant change, and that there will be a certain level of uncertainty as the two countries adjust to the new situation and the new circumstances?
No, I do not think so. Let me say that if you look at all the issues that you have discussed over the last few minutes, in every sense there's a strong continuity that will prevail. For example, in defense, and I would like to point out that for India, Russia will remain its primary partner, at least for the next 3 decades.
But it's not any longer. America is our main supplier of arms at the moment.
In terms of trade or purchases in 1 year. But if you look at the 5th generation fighter aircraft arrangement, that itself will be worth anywhere between $30 and $35 billion. And if you look at the multi-role transport aircraft, if you look at the other arrangements, you see we have moved away from a buyer-seller relationship to a relationship which involves design, research, development and production of arms systems, which we're doing together as a 50-50 partner. So it won't show up in your trade figures. But if you look at BrahMos, if you look at, as I said, the FGFA, the multi-role transport
Can I stop you, Mr. Malhotra? We are running out of time. I don't want to get lost in the details. I want you to focus on that big picture. Are you therefore saying that this is going to be a successful visit, and that the sort of tensions of the changing nature of the relationship which we are discussing are temporary and they're not going to actually throw either side out of equilibrium?
I would absolutely agree with that. I think this will be a very successful visit. And if somehow these sanctions and all kind of move away, Russia would better appreciate us as being a very close and trustworthy friend. And I think that really adds on to the possibilities that will open up. Meanwhile, the opportunities there that we'll try and avail of while Russia is under sanctions.
Very, very quickly, because we're running out of time, Mr. Unnikrishnan, how do you assess the future of India-Russia relations at a time when Modi is clearly reaching out to Obama, Abbott, Abe? Maybe next year he'll be reaching out to Merkel and Cameron. Well, none of whom, by the way, are friends of Russia at the moment.
Absolutely, but it's a very different lookout or outlook from here. The mantra for this government is development with jobs. And if Russia is able to write itself into that story, Russia will be welcome.
It's not going to be easy for Russia to find
It may not be easy, but if they are able to do it with nuclear energy, hydrocarbons, diamonds, with various other things, the relationship is on a good
You're suggesting
side.
the onus is on the Russians to find a role in India's development and in the relationship?
I am suggesting that Russians will have to think out of the box to find new ways of engaging India.
So to use that dreadful phrase, the ball's in Putin's court.
Yes.
All right. My thanks to both of you coming to studio. My thanks also to Shiv Mukherjee and Ajay Malhotra for joining us. And I apologize for the fact that Mr. Malhotra wasn't able to be on OB. I'm afraid we had trouble getting the OB.